Taemin Park stepped off the transport ship and looked up at the massive building in front of him. The Galactic Military Academy stretched into the purple sky of Nexus Prime like a metal mountain. Silver towers twisted upward, connected by floating bridges that glowed with blue energy. Ships from dozens of worlds flew between the towers, carrying students and teachers from across the galaxy. His hands shook as he grabbed his single bag. 3 years of studying, testing, and fighting for this chance had led to this moment. He was 19 years old and one of only 3 humans accepted to the Academy in the past 10 years. The weight of representing his entire species pressed down on his shoulders like a heavy stone. Other new students walked past him toward the main entrance. Taemin had studied different alien species for months, but seeing them in person still amazed him. A group of tall, blue-skinned Altarians moved together, their large black eyes never blinking. They communicated without speaking, sharing thoughts through their natural telepathy. One of them glanced at Taemin and whispered something to the others. They all turned to stare at him before walking away, making sounds that might have been laughter. A massive creature with gray, rock-like skin stomped past. The Krolek stood nearly 3 meters tall, its 4 arms ending in hands that could crush steel. Its small red eyes looked down at Taemin for a moment before moving on. Even the smallest aliens here seemed designed for war. The Vorthons moved like liquid lightning, their thin bodies covered in natural armor that shifted colors. Everything about them screamed speed and deadly precision. Taemin looked down at his own body. Average height, average build, soft pink skin that would tear easily. No natural armor, no telepathy, no super speed. Just a human from Earth who had scored well on some tests. The Academy's main hall was bigger than any building Taemin had ever seen. The ceiling disappeared into shadows far above, held up by pillars that looked like they were made from crystallized starlight. Holographic displays showed star maps, battle formations, and student rankings. Hundreds of cadets from dozens of species filled the space, their voices creating a mixture of sounds that hurt Taemin's ears. A floating platform descended from above, carrying a figure that made every conversation stop. Instructor Veltar was ancient even by Zenthari standards. His people lived for thousands of years, and he had been teaching strategy at the Academy for longer than human civilization had existed. His tall, thin body was covered in dark scales that seemed to absorb light. 6 arms moved independently as he gestured, and his 3 eyes could look in different directions at the same time. "Welcome, new cadets," Veltar said, his voice somehow reaching every corner of the massive hall without being loud. "You represent the finest military minds your species have to offer. Some of you will become great commanders, others will fail and return home in shame." His middle eye fixed on Taemin, and the human felt like the ancient being was looking directly into his soul. "This year, we have an unusual addition to our ranks," Veltar continued. "For the first time in a decade, a human has qualified for our program." Every head in the hall turned toward Taemin. He felt his face grow hot as hundreds of alien eyes studied him. Whispers started up in languages he didn't recognize, but their meaning was clear enough. What was this primitive creature doing here? "The human will be treated like any other cadet," Veltar said firmly. "He will receive no special consideration for his species' limitations." Limitations. The word hit Taemin like a punch to the stomach. He had worked harder than anyone on Earth to get here, but to these beings he was already seen as defective. The orientation continued with demonstrations of the Academy's training systems. Advanced neural interfaces that could link directly to a cadet's brain, allowing them to control entire fleets of ships with pure thought. Simulation chambers that could recreate any battlefield in the galaxy. Weapons that could destroy planets and shields that could stop them. Taemin watched an Altarian cadet named Chiron demonstrate the neural interface. The blue-skinned being placed a silver crown on his head, and suddenly dozens of holographic ships appeared around him. With subtle movements of his fingers and thoughts that the interface read directly from his brain, Chiron made the ships dance through complex battle formations. His natural telepathy allowed him to coordinate multiple units at once, something that would take other species years to learn. "Impressive," said Nixara, a female Vorthon whose armor shifted from green to silver as she spoke. Her movements were so fast that Taemin's eyes had trouble following them. Though not as elegant as proper speed tactics. "Speed means nothing without proper logical analysis," rumbled Morden, the Krolek whose voice sounded like grinding stone. "Strategic victory requires systematic thinking." They all looked at Taemin, waiting for him to add something to the conversation. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. What could he possibly contribute? His species had no telepathy, no superspeed, no enhanced logical processing. Humans were just human. The human appears to be malfunctioning, Chiron said, his voice carrying that strange musical quality all Altarians had. Perhaps the neural strain of being in our presence is too much for his primitive brain. Laughter rippled through the group of watching cadets. Not cruel laughter, but the kind reserved for a pet that had tried to do something beyond its abilities. Later that night, Taemin sat alone in his assigned quarters. The room was designed for any species, with furniture that could adapt to different body types. He had chosen a simple human configuration, a bed, a desk, a chair. Through his window, he could see the lights of the Academy's towers and the strange constellations of Nexus Prime's night sky. A message appeared on his room's communication system. It was from Sora Kim, one of the other 2 humans at the Academy. She was 2 years ahead of him, specializing in communications and logistics. "Don't let them get to you," her message said. "I heard about today. It gets easier, but it never really stops. They think they know what humans can do, but they're wrong. We have something they don't understand yet." Taemin stared at the message for a long time. Something they don't understand. What could that possibly be? Every advantage seemed to belong to the other species. They were faster, stronger, smarter, and better equipped for war. But as he drifted off to sleep, he thought about his grandfather's stories. Tales of human soldiers who had won impossible battles not through superior technology or natural gifts, but through stubbornness, creativity, and the refusal to give up when any sane being would have surrendered. Maybe that was something after all. 3 weeks into his training, Taemin had learned to expect failure. Every morning brought new tests that seemed designed to prove humans had no place among the galaxy's military elite. The advanced technology that other cadets used like extensions of their own bodies remained frustratingly difficult for him to master. He sat in the Academy's vast library, studying tactical manuals while other cadets effortlessly absorbed information through direct neural downloads. The Altarians could share knowledge telepathically, learning in minutes what took Taemin hours to read. The Vorthans processed data so quickly that they finished complex strategy problems before Taemin had even understood the questions. Still reading the old-fashioned way, Taemin looked up to see Sora Kim approaching his table. The older human woman carried herself with quiet confidence that he envied. Her black hair was pulled back in a regulation style, and her uniform bore the insignia of a senior communications cadet. "The neural interfaces don't work well for humans," Taemin said, closing his book. "Something about how our brains are structured. The other species can plug in and download information directly, but for us it just causes headaches." Sora sat down across from him, lowering her voice. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Did you know that every species here thinks in predictable patterns? The Altarians always coordinate through telepathy. The Vorthans rely on speed. The Kroleks follow pure logic. They're all very good at what they do, but they always do the same things." Before Taemin could ask what she meant, the library's silence was broken by an announcement. Admiral Vexthol's voice echoed through every speaker in the Academy. "All cadets report to the Grand Assembly Hall immediately. It is time to announce this year's Grand Strategy Trial." The Grand Assembly Hall filled quickly with excited cadets. Taemin had heard whispers about the Grand Strategy Trial since his first day, but no one would explain exactly what it involved. Senior cadets spoke about it in hushed, respectful tones, the way humans might talk about legends. Admiral Vexthol stood at the center of the hall, his massive Karnath body covered in ceremonial armor. His species resembled what humans might call dragons, if dragons had evolved to walk upright and command space fleets. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had conquered star systems. "The Grand Strategy Trial is the Academy's oldest tradition," the Admiral began. "For over 2,000 years it has tested the finest military minds in the galaxy. Many of you have trained your entire lives for this moment." Holographic displays showed previous years' trials. Taemin watched as cadets commanded vast fleets of starships in battles that stretched across multiple solar systems. The complexity was overwhelming. Thousands of variables, supply lines, communication delays, and tactical considerations that had to be balanced simultaneously. "This year's trial will follow the traditional format," Admiral Vexthul continued. Each participating cadet will command a fleet of 50 vessels. The battlefield encompasses 3 star systems connected by hyperspace lanes. Victory conditions are simple. Eliminate all other commanders or control 75% of strategic points for 12 consecutive hours. The Admiral's eyes swept across the assembled cadets. The trial duration is 72 hours maximum. Neural fatigue is a significant factor. Most species can maintain peak performance for 20 to 30 hours before their abilities begin to decline. Tae-min felt his stomach drop. 72 hours of constant strategic thinking while controlling 50 starships across multiple solar systems. The other cadets looked excited or determined. He just felt sick. One more thing, the Admiral said, and his tone grew more serious. No cadet has ever defeated an entire class alone. The trial has always been won by alliances and coalitions. Working with others is considered essential to victory. After the announcement, the Academy buzzed with excitement and planning. Cadets gathered in groups, forming alliances based on complementary abilities. The Altarians naturally gravitated toward leadership roles, their telepathy allowing them to coordinate multiple allies simultaneously. The Vorthans offered their speed for hit-and-run tactics. The Kroleks provided logical analysis and raw firepower. Tae-min found himself standing alone as the alliances formed around him. No one approached the human cadet with offers of partnership. Why would they? He brought no special abilities to a team, only limitations. Looks like someone doesn't have any friends, Kyron said, approaching with a group of other high-ranking cadets. The Altarian's black eyes showed something that might have been pity. Perhaps the human would like to join a real alliance? What did you have in mind? Tae-min asked, though he suspected he already knew. The Coalition of Excellence, Kyron announced proudly. 15 of the Academy's top cadets representing 7 species. With my telepathic coordination, Nixara's tactical speed, and Morden's logical analysis, we represent the perfect combination of abilities. And what would I contribute? Tae-min asked. The silence stretched uncomfortably long before Kyron answered. Well, you could observe, learn from your betters, consider it an educational opportunity. The other cadets laughed, not cruelly, but with the casual dismissal reserved for something beneath serious consideration. Tae-min felt his face burn with embarrassment and anger. Thanks, but I think I'll try on my own, he said. The laughter stopped. Morden's massive head tilted to one side, his red eyes studying Tae-min like a puzzling equation. On your own? Did you not hear the Admiral? No cadet has ever won alone. Maybe it's time someone tried, Tae-min said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. The human has chosen suicide, Nixara said, her armor shifting to an amused yellow color. How entertaining. This trial just became much more interesting. That evening, Tae-min met with Sora in a quiet corner of the Academy's recreation deck. She had brought tea from Earth, a simple comfort that made him feel less alone. They're calling you crazy, she said without preamble. The whole Academy is talking about the human who thinks he can win alone. Maybe I am crazy, Tae-min admitted. But joining their coalition would just mean getting eliminated first while contributing nothing. At least this way I control my own fate. Sora studied him over her teacup. Do you know why humans were really accepted into this academy? Because we tested well? No, she said quietly. Because Instructor Veltar requested it specifically. He's been studying human military history for decades. Our wars, our tactics, our victories against impossible odds. He thinks we have something the galaxy needs. What? I don't know yet, Sora admitted. But think about it. Every species here excels at something specific. They've evolved to be perfect at their particular type of warfare. But humans, we're generalists, we adapt. We survive things that should kill us. We win battles we should lose. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. The trial isn't just about commanding ships, Tae-min. It's about lasting 72 hours while making thousands of decisions under incredible pressure. Most species will burn out their natural abilities trying to maintain peak performance. But humans, we're built for endurance. As Tae-min walked back to his quarters that night, he thought about her words. Endurance. It wasn't as flashy as telepathy or superspeed, but maybe it was something. His grandfather had survived 3 years in a prisoner of war camp during Earth's unification wars. His great-grandmother had worked 18-hour days in the factories that rebuilt Korea after the climate disasters. Maybe surviving was what humans did best. The next morning brought news that made his situation even more challenging. The Coalition of Excellence had grown to include 18 cadets, more than half the class. They had divided the galaxy into sectors and assigned roles based on each species' strengths. Their coordination would be flawless, their tactics proven effective. Against this overwhelming alliance, Taman would stand alone with 50 ships, and whatever stubborn human foolishness had gotten him this far, he was looking forward to it. The weeks before the grand strategy trial passed like a blur of preparation and doubt. While other cadets fine-tuned their natural abilities and practiced with advanced neural interfaces, Taman took a different approach. He spent his time in the Academy's historical archives, studying something most cadets ignored: the military history of primitive species. The archives contained detailed records of conflicts from across the galaxy, but Taman focused on the wars of underdeveloped worlds, species that had won battles despite technological disadvantages, civilizations that had survived against overwhelming odds through unconventional tactics. Most interesting to him were the records of human conflicts from Earth's past. The Academy had detailed files on every major war humanity had ever fought, analyzing tactics and strategies with the cold precision of alien observers. What they saw as primitive curiosities, Taman began to recognize as something else entirely. Guerrilla warfare, he muttered, reading about ancient Earth conflicts. Small forces defeating larger armies through hit-and-run tactics, avoiding direct confrontation, wearing down enemies through constant pressure. Asymmetric warfare, psychological operations. The neural interface that other cadets used so effortlessly remained frustrating for Taman to operate, but he was beginning to see this as an advantage rather than a limitation. While other species thought in patterns enhanced by technology, human thinking remained stubbornly organic, unpredictable, creative in ways that machines couldn't enhance or aliens couldn't anticipate. Sora found him in the archives one evening, surrounded by holographic displays showing ancient battle maps from Earth's Korean War. "Studying the old battles again?" she asked, settling into a chair beside him. "Look at this," Taman said, highlighting a particular engagement. Chinese forces with superior numbers and equipment against United Nations troops trapped in terrible positions. Every tactical computer would predict total defeat for the UN forces. But they didn't lose, Sora observed, reading the historical summary. They didn't win either, but they survived. They adapted to conditions no other army had ever faced. They held positions that should have been impossible to defend, and they did it through sheer stubbornness and creative thinking. Sora studied the battle analysis. The alien historians marked this as an example of irrational tactical persistence. They couldn't understand why humans kept fighting when logic said they should surrender. "Exactly," Taman said, excitement building in his voice. "Every species here thinks logically. Even their creativity follows predictable patterns. The Altarians coordinate through telepathy, so they always fight as unified groups. The Vorthans rely on speed, so they favor quick strikes. The Krolix follow pure logic, so they always choose the mathematically optimal solution. And humans? We do whatever it takes to survive. We adapt. We break our own rules when we have to. We make decisions that don't make sense to anyone else, including ourselves sometimes." The next day brought an unexpected visitor to Taman's quarters. Instructor Veltar arrived without warning, his tall form barely fitting through the doorway designed for smaller species. The ancient Zenthari's three eyes studied Taman's room, taking in the scattered historical texts and tactical manuals. "Preparing for the trial, I see," Veltar said, his voice carrying that ageless quality that made it impossible to tell if he was amused or disapproving. "Yes, sir," Taman replied, standing at attention. "Interesting choice of study materials," the instructor continued, picking up a manual on guerrilla tactics with one of his 6 arms. "Most cadets focus on optimizing their natural abilities. You appear to be studying primitive warfare." "Human warfare, sir," Taman corrected, then immediately regretted his boldness. But Veltar's scaled face showed what might have been approval. "Indeed, human warfare. Tell me, Cadet Park, what have you learned from these studies?" Taman hesitated, then decided honesty was his only option. "That humans fight differently than other species, sir. We don't have their advantages, so we've learned to win through methods they wouldn't consider, such as endurance, adaptation, unpredictability, refusing to quit even when logic says we should." Veltar set down the manual and fixed all three eyes on Taimin. And you believe these qualities will serve you in the trial? I hope so, sir. It's all I have. The ancient instructor was quiet for a long moment, his scales seeming to shift color in the room's light. The Coalition of Excellence has requested that you be given a disadvantageous starting position in the trial. They believe it will end your participation quickly and allow them to focus on real competition. Taimin felt his stomach drop. What kind of disadvantageous position? The dead zone, Veltar said. A sector between three major hyperspace routes with limited resources and no strategic value. Most military theorists consider it indefensible. And you agreed to this? I did, Veltar said. And now Taimin was certain he could see amusement in those ancient eyes. It should prove educational. After the instructor left, Taimin sat alone with the weight of impending defeat pressing down on him. The dead zone was a tactical nightmare, surrounded by enemies cut off from resources with no natural advantages to exploit. Any reasonable commander would surrender immediately rather than waste lives in an impossible situation. But as he stared at his collection of human military histories, a different perspective began to emerge. How many times had human forces been placed in impossible positions? How many times had they been surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned, and written off as doomed? And how many times had they found a way to survive anyway? That night he called his grandfather on Earth. The old man's weathered face appeared on the communication screen, smiling despite the interstellar distance between them. Grandson, his grandfather said in Korean, you look troubled. Taimin explained his situation, the trial, the coalition against him, the impossible starting position. His grandfather listened without interruption, his expression growing thoughtful. Do you know why I survived the prison camp? His grandfather asked when Taimin finished. You were strong. You never gave up. No, the old man said. I survived because I thought differently than my captors expected. They planned for prisoners who would try to escape or fight or organize resistance. They didn't plan for someone who would simply endure, quietly gathering information and waiting for the right moment. He leaned closer to the screen. The others saw my weakness. I was young, small, obviously afraid. But that weakness became my strength. They ignored me because I wasn't threatening. That mistake cost them everything. After the call ended, Taimin began to see his situation differently. The Coalition of Excellence had made the same mistake as his grandfather's captors. They saw only his weaknesses and ignored the possibility that those weaknesses might hide strengths they couldn't understand. They expected him to play by their rules, using their tactics, competing in areas where they held every advantage. But what if he didn't? What if he fought a completely different kind of war? The dead zone wasn't a prison, it was an opportunity. While the coalition focused on controlling valuable territory and strategic positions, he could do something they would never expect. He could disappear. For the next week, Taimin refined his strategy. Not the conventional approach of commanding from the front and coordinating major battles, but something far more subtle. He would turn the trial into the kind of conflict humans understood best. A survival situation where victory went not to the strongest or fastest, but to whoever could endure the longest. The night before the trial, Sora found him on the Academy's observation deck, looking out at the stars of Nexus Prime. Ready? She asked. No, Taimin admitted. But that's never stopped humans before. She smiled. Veltar asked me to give you something. She handed him a small device, a standard military compass from Earth, ancient and simple. What's this for? He said you'd understand when you needed to, Sora replied. Good luck, Taimin. Show them what humans can do. As he held the simple compass in his hands, Taimin thought about all the human warriors who had carried similar devices into impossible battles. They hadn't won through superior technology or natural advantages. They had won by refusing to accept defeat, by adapting to conditions no one else could survive, by finding ways to turn their weaknesses into unexpected strengths. Tomorrow, he would find out if those same qualities could triumph among the stars. The trial chamber was a massive sphere lined with neural interface pods, each one designed to accommodate different alien physiologies. Taimin's pod was smaller than most, built for the modest requirements of human biology. As he settled into the neural interface chair, he could see other cadets in their own pods, already connecting to the systems that would control their fleets. The familiar discomfort of the neural interface settled over his mind like a heavy blanket. While other species experienced seamless integration with the technology, humans always felt the artificial nature of the connection. Taman had learned to accept this limitation, but today he wondered if it might actually be an advantage. Trial beginning in 60 seconds, Admiral Vexthul's voice echoed through the chamber. Remember, cadets, this is not merely a test of tactical ability. It is a measure of your capacity to lead under extreme pressure. The galaxy is watching. The holographic displays around Taman's pod came to life, showing 3 star systems connected by hyperspace lanes. Strategic points marked valuable resources, supply stations, and defensive positions. The coalition members appeared as blue icons, scattered across the most advantageous starting positions. Taman's red icon sat alone in the dead zone, exactly as Veltar had promised. Trial begins now, the Admiral announced. Immediately, Taman's tactical display filled with information, 50 starships under his command, ranging from fast scouts to heavy cruisers, supply levels, fuel status, crew readiness, thousands of variables that needed constant monitoring. Around him he could sense the other cadets diving into action, their enhanced abilities allowing them to process information and issue commands at superhuman speeds. The coalition of excellence moved with frightening efficiency. Chiron's telepathic abilities allowed him to coordinate with other Altarians instantly. Nixara's speed meant her scouting ships were already mapping enemy positions, while others were still organizing their fleets. Morden's logical analysis identified the most efficient attack routes and resource allocation strategies. Within the first hour, coalition forces were advancing toward Taman's position from 3 directions. Their approach was textbook perfect, overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. Any conventional commander would have no choice but to fight a desperate defensive battle and hope for a miracle. Taman did something else entirely. He ran. As coalition forces closed in on his starting position, they found empty space. Taman had split his fleet into small groups and scattered them throughout the dead zone's asteroid fields and nebula clouds. His ships disappeared from long-range sensors hidden among the stellar debris that made the region so undesirable. Where did he go? Nixara's voice crackled over the communication channels that all cadets could monitor. My scouts show no major fleet concentrations in the dead zone. Hiding like a frightened animal, Chiron replied, his telepathic coordination allowing him to speak while simultaneously commanding multiple fleet elements. It matters little. He has no resources and no strategic positions. Time is on our side. But Taman wasn't just hiding, he was watching. While the coalition celebrated their easy capture of his starting position, he used small, stealthy ships to observe their deployment patterns. He studied how each species preferred to organize their forces, how they communicated, how they made decisions under pressure. The Altarians always formed tight clusters around their telepathic coordinators. The Vorthans spread out in fast-moving formations that could strike quickly, but required constant communication to maintain cohesion. The Krolex built methodical defensive lines with overlapping fields of fire, mathematically perfect but predictable. As the first day wore on, Taman began implementing tactics that the alien military manuals classified as primitive and inefficient. Hit-and-run attacks using single ships against supply convoys. False sensor readings created by hiding ships in asteroid shadows. Coordinated strikes that appeared random but slowly wore down enemy logistics. This is irritating. Morden's deep voice rumbled across the communications. The human's attack served no strategic purpose. He cannot win through such methods. He's buying time, Chiron realized, his mental voice sharp with growing concern. But for what? He has no reinforcements coming. No secret alliances. What Taman had was something the coalition didn't expect or understand. Patience. While alien cadets pushed their enhanced abilities to maintain peak performance, he settled into a steady rhythm that he could sustain for days if necessary. The neural interface that felt clumsy and foreign to him actually prevented the kind of mental burnout that would eventually affect the other species. By hour 18, the first cracks appeared in the coalition's coordination. The Vorthans, accustomed to quick victories through superior speed, grew frustrated with Taman's refusal to engage in direct combat. Some of their units began pursuing individual human ships into ambushes, abandoning the careful coordination that made their alliance effective. Maintain formation, Chiron commanded. but Taemin could hear the strain in his telepathic voice. Coordinating so many different minds across such a vast battlefield was exhausting even for an Altarian. As the second day began, Taemin escalated his psychological warfare. He started broadcasting false communications between his scattered ships, making it appear that he had secret reinforcements hiding throughout the dead zone. He programmed automated distress signals from locations where no ships actually existed, forcing coalition forces to investigate empty space. Most importantly, he began to turn the coalition's greatest strength against them. Their perfect coordination required constant communication between different species and battle groups. Taemin's ships began jamming these communications at critical moments, causing confusion and friendly fire incidents. "Nixara, why are your ships firing on my defensive positions?" Morden demanded during one chaotic engagement. "We're not. Those aren't our ship signatures," the Vorthon replied, her voice tight with confusion. They were right. They weren't Nixara's ships. They were Taemin's vessels, disguised with false sensor signatures to look like Vorthon raiders. While the coalition spent precious time sorting out who was shooting at whom, his real attack force struck their supply depot from an unexpected direction. By hour 36, something unprecedented was happening. Individual coalition members began questioning each other's competence. The perfect trust that held their alliance together started to fracture as exhaustion and frustration took their toll. Perhaps the Krolix should focus on defending their assigned sectors instead of pursuing glory, Chiron suggested after Morden's forces failed to protect a key resource station. Krolek forces follow optimal tactical doctrine, Morden replied coldly. If Altarian coordination was more efficient, such failures would not occur. Taemin smiled grimly as he listened to their arguments. He was doing what human guerrilla fighters had done for thousands of years, turning superior enemies against each other through careful manipulation and patient pressure. The breakthrough came during hour 42. Exhaustion was beginning to affect even the enhanced minds of the alien cadets. Their reaction times slowed, their coordination became sloppy, their decision-making showed signs of fatigue. But Taemin, running on determination and the stubborn human refusal to quit, was actually getting stronger. He launched his most ambitious operation yet, a coordinated attack on 3 coalition positions simultaneously, using tactics that appeared completely random, but were actually based on patterns he had observed over the previous day and a half. While coalition forces rushed to respond to what looked like desperate strikes, his real objective was something they had never considered protecting. The coalition's main communication relay, hidden in a seemingly worthless asteroid field, suddenly found itself under attack by Taemin's entire remaining fleet. In the 15 minutes it took coalition forces to realize what was happening and respond, he had destroyed their primary coordination system. Suddenly, the Coalition of Excellence became 18 individual commanders, trying to coordinate through secondary systems while under constant attack. Their perfect unity dissolved into chaos as each species reverted to their own tactical preferences without telepathic oversight. Regroup at Rally Point 7, Chiron's voice commanded, but it was too late. Without their communication advantage, the coalition was just a collection of individual fleets, powerful, but no longer invincible. As the second day ended and the trial entered its final phase, Taemin had achieved something impossible. Through patience, cunning, and the uniquely human ability to endure suffering while maintaining focus, he had reduced the most powerful military alliance in Academy history to a disorganized mob. But the hardest part still lay ahead. He had to actually win. The third day of the grand strategy trial began with chaos. The Coalition of Excellence, once a perfectly coordinated machine of war, had dissolved into competing factions as exhaustion and mistrust took their toll. Without their primary communication system, the different species reverted to their natural fighting styles, often working against each other instead of together. Taemin watched the breakdown from his hidden command ship deep in the Dead Zone's asteroid field. His neural interface showed him the tactical situation across all 3 star systems, and for the first time since the trial began, he allowed himself to hope. The impossible was becoming possible, but victory still seemed distant. Despite their internal conflicts, the Coalition cadets still controlled most of the strategic positions and had more ships than he did. What they lacked now was unity, and the ability to coordinate effectively. That gave him the opening he needed. Time for the final phase, Taemin muttered to himself, calling up the attack plan he had been developing for over 40 hours. While other species had burned through their enhanced abilities, trying to maintain peak performance, Taemin had paced himself like a marathon runner. His grandfather's lessons about endurance over speed, patience over aggression were finally paying off. As alien minds began to fray under the constant pressure, his remained sharp and focused. The Vorthons were the first to break completely. Their natural speed had become a liability as exhaustion made them reckless. 3 separate Vorthon commanders launched independent attacks on what they thought were isolated human positions, only to discover they had walked into carefully prepared traps. Taemin's ships, hidden in asteroid shadows and sensor dead zones, emerged to destroy the Vorthon forces piece by piece. Impossible! Nixara's voice crackled over the communications as her flagship exploded under concentrated fire. How did he predict our movements? The answer was simple. Taemin had studied her attack patterns for 2 days, learning exactly how Vorthons thought and fought. They always chose the fastest route, always relied on their speed advantage, always attacked in the same aggressive formations. Once he understood their preferences, predicting their actions became easy. With the Vorthons eliminated, Taemin turned his attention to the Kroleks. Morden's forces had established strong defensive positions around a major resource depot, using their species' natural talent for logical analysis to create mathematically perfect fortifications. Any direct assault would fail against such well-planned defenses, so Taemin didn't attack the defenses. He attacked their logic. Using captured Vorton ships with their sensor signatures intact, he created a false fleet that appeared to be approaching from the Kroleks' left flank. Morden's logical mind immediately calculated the optimal response. Shift forces to counter the new threat while maintaining defensive integrity. It was the mathematically correct decision. While Krolek forces moved to defensive positions based on pure logic, Taemin's real attack came from the right flank using ships that had been hiding in the system's outer asteroid belt for over 20 hours. The Kroleks had calculated perfectly for the threat they could see, but humans had taught him that the most dangerous enemies were often the ones you didn't know existed. Treachery! Morden's voice boomed as his command ship came under fire. This violates all principles of honorable combat. This is war, Taemin replied simply, and eliminated the Krolek commander with a concentrated barrage. Now only the Altarians remained, but they were the most dangerous opponents. Chiron still commanded a significant fleet, and his telepathic abilities meant he could coordinate his remaining forces with deadly efficiency. Even exhausted, an Altarian mind was formidable. But Taemin had learned something important about telepathy during his studies. It worked both ways. Altarians could share thoughts and coordinate perfectly, but they also shared fears, doubts, and exhaustion. When one Altarian felt despair, they all felt it. Using his remaining ships, Taemin began implementing a strategy of pure psychological warfare. False retreats that turned into ambushes, feints that appeared to be major attacks but vanished like ghosts, constant pressure from directions that seemed impossible to predict or counter. Most importantly, he made sure that every engagement ended with Altarian losses. Not massive defeats, but steady attrition that slowly wore down their numbers and their morale. Each loss rippled through their telepathic network, spreading doubt and fear to every connected mind. He fights like a monster, one of the Altarian voices whispered over the communications. Nothing we do affects him. He just keeps coming. Maintain discipline, Chiron commanded, but Taemin could hear the exhaustion in his mental voice. Coordinating a telepathic network while under constant attack was burning out even his enhanced capabilities. As hour 60 approached, Taemin prepared for his final gambit. Chiron's remaining forces had taken defensive positions around the trial's most valuable strategic point, a supply nexus that controlled access to 2 major hyperspace routes. Capturing it would give Taemin control of over 75% of the strategic points, enough to claim victory. But the position was heavily defended and would require a direct assault. Everything he had worked for came down to this moment. All ships, this is Admiral Park, Taemin said into his communication system, using the title that would be his if he somehow survived this trial. We're going to do something they won't expect. We're going to attack directly, head-on, like humans have always done when everything else failed. His fleet emerged from hiding positions throughout the system, converging on the Altarian stronghold in a formation that violated every principle of modern space warfare. No fancy maneuvers, no clever tricks, just 50 human-controlled ships charging straight at the enemy like ancient cavalry. Has he lost his mind? Chiron's voice crackled with confusion. This is suicide. It should have been suicide. The Altarians had superior positions, overlapping fields of fire and telepathic coordination that should have allowed them to destroy the attacking force with mathematical precision. But they had made one crucial error. They had planned for a human who thought like them. Taemin didn't think like them. He thought like a human who had studied every battle his species had ever fought, who understood that sometimes victory required accepting terrible losses for strategic gain. His ships absorbed devastating fire as they closed the distance, but they kept coming with the stubborn determination that had carried humanity through countless desperate situations. When the human fleet finally reached the Altarian lines, the close-range battle was brief and brutal. Ships exploded around him as Taemin pressed his attack with single-minded focus. But for every human ship destroyed, he made sure to take an Altarian vessel with it. And unlike his enemies, he had nothing left to lose. The battle's turning point came when Taemin's flagship, battered and bleeding atmosphere, rammed directly into Chiron's command ship. As both vessels died in fire and vacuum, the Altarian telepathic network collapsed. Without their coordinator, the remaining Altarian ships found themselves fighting as individuals for the first time in their lives. This is Admiral Park to all remaining coalition forces. Taemin's voice came from his backup command ship. You are alone, outnumbered, and exhausted. Surrender now and I will accept it with honor. One by one, the surviving alien cadets acknowledged defeat. As Hour 67 ticked past, the trial's computer systems confirmed what seemed impossible. Cadet Taemin Park controlled 81% of the strategic points and had eliminated or forced the surrender of every other participant. The trial chamber fell silent as the neural interfaces disengaged. Taemin climbed out of his pod on shaking legs, his body exhausted but his mind clear. Around him, alien cadets emerged from their own pods, staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to something that might have been respect. Admiral Vexthul's voice echoed through the chamber. The grand strategy trial is concluded. For the first time in the Academy's history, a single cadet has achieved total victory. Cadet Park, report to the briefing chamber immediately. The briefing chamber contained the Academy's senior faculty, including Instructor Veltar, whose ancient eyes seemed to hold satisfaction. Admiral Vexthul stood at the center, his dragon-like features unreadable. Explain, the Admiral said simply. Taemin took a deep breath. I fought the only war I knew how to fight, sir. A human war. I used endurance instead of speed, patience instead of power, creativity instead of logic. I turned their strengths against them and refused to quit when any reasonable being would have surrendered. You violated nearly every principle of modern warfare, Admiral Vexthul observed. Yes, sir. I fought like my ancestors fought when they had no other choice. Instructor Veltar stepped forward, his 6 arms moving in what Taemin had learned was a gesture of approval. Which brings us to why you were truly here, Cadet Park. The trial was never just about testing your abilities. It was about proving a theory, sir. The galaxy faces a threat from the dark regions beyond our borders, Veltar explained. An enemy that doesn't fight according to any known tactical doctrine. They use strategies that our most advanced minds cannot predict or counter. They appear to be completely irrational, yet they win battle after battle against superior forces.